Hey guys, this is Patrick from Fight Prof, where we break down the biggest and latest fights. And today we're going to be breaking down Junior Dos Santos versus Miocic 2. So before we get started with this, I'm just going to ask you guys to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So I guess the best place to start with this matchup is going back to Junior Dos Santos and Miocic's first fight. And what you really see in that first match, it was really a close fight, but what it really highlighted was Stipe Miocic's fight IQ and JDS's biggest flaw. And now the problem with Junior Dos Santos is that he always backs himself up into the cage. So Junior Dos Santos is a very linear fighter, meaning that he fights usually on a straight line and he backs himself up right into the cage, which is a really big problem, especially in MMA. And you see this a lot because it happened in the second and third Cain Velasquez fight, and it happened a lot in the Stipe fight, their first match, and even against Ben Rothwell and Mark Hunt, opponents that really didn't want him up against the cage, they managed to put him up there. So why is running onto the cage a bad thing? There's a lot of reasons why it's pretty bad. The first thing is it crushes your stance and you can't generate any power when your stance is crushed. When you have your feet level, there's no way to generate that hip torque that you need to throw a really good punch or a kick. If you just imagine yourself, every time you're boxing, you're in a stance. You always have 1 foot forward and 1 foot back. But against the cage, your legs are either going to be level with each other or it's going to be very, very little, the staggering of them. So it minimizes the amount of power that you can generate when you're punching back at your opponent. And even if they step in and get clipped by one of your punches, it's not gonna hurt them as much as it would a normal punch. 2 is either you stay there and you get hit, or you circle to your left or your right and you have a 50% chance of being hit with a power shot by your opponent. So if you just stay there and try to cover up, you're just gonna get killed and murked because the opponent's just gonna be picking his shots and taking you out. And if you circle left or right, the opponent just has to throw any type of strike and he has a 50% chance of you walking into it and creating a collision with that strike and increasing the chance of you getting seriously injured or knocked out even. And against strong wrestlers that can grind you out against the cage, such as Cain Velasquez and Stipe Miocic, they can get the takedown a lot easier or just pin you against the cage and just grind you out, because when you need to sprawl against a takedown or try to defend it, there's like a lot of defense mechanisms that you have. Like you have your forearms, your forehead, you're gonna sprawl your hips into the opponent's head as they go in, but the sprawl is basically the main part of the takedown defense. And if you can't scoot your hips backwards, then it's going to give an easier shot for your opponents to grab and clutch onto your hips. And that was basically the story of the first half of the first fight against Stipe Miocic with Junior Dos Santos. Stipe would be coming, pressuring JDS to the cage, and because JDS backed up straight to the cage, he had limited options of what he can do, because he's a really good boxer in MMA not MMA standard. There's not really standard for boxing in MMA, but he's a pretty good puncher is what I meant to say. And when his back is against the cage and his feet were level and he had no stance, his options were really limited to what he could do. And that's where he took an ass whooping. And that's exactly how Cain beat JDS twice. He just kept on getting JDS to the cage, kept on beating him up, roughing him up, and he did a really good job of mixing up his striking. He would go striking, and then as soon as JDS started to strike back, Cain Velasquez would duck underneath his return for an easy takedown. But for 25 minutes times 2, 50 minutes, it was just Cain Velasquez whooping JDS's ass against the ring, against the cage. And that's what makes Stipe a really hard matchup for anybody in the heavyweight division, is that not only does he have an all-around skill set, he can wrestle, get off the ground, he can grapple, he can strike pretty decently. The biggest thing is that he comes in with game plans, and he took the page right out of Cain Velasquez and his team's book of getting Junior Dos Santos to the cage and putting on an ass whooping over there. And JDS hates getting his back against the cage, even though he keeps on running up against it. Another example of Stipe Miocic being a really good game planner was in the Mark Hunt fight, actually. Mark Hunt is now a counter striker. He loves to get opponents to lead so he can hit them with counter strikes. And what Stipe did was that he feinted and faked his jab. So he had Mark Hunt overreacting and reaching for strikes or for openings that weren't there, which put him out of position to get hit by the real jabs and tired him out. Because if you're winging punches and you're expecting the opponent to be somewhere but they're not, that's a very tiring game, especially in heavyweight, since a lot of heavyweights can only go past, when they get past the first round, they're already gasping for air and having trouble standing up from the stool. In the JDS fight, he had JDS constantly against the fence, and against Verdum came out super aggressive, chasing Miocic with punches. The thing is that Verdum had his chin hang up way well ahead of him, chasing Miocic with his punches, and Miocic just fought on the counter mostly in that fight. And if you rewatch the fight, the finishing blow is a counter right hand from Miocic. So he knew that Verdum's boxing altogether is not crisp. All he does is lead with 1 and 2s, jabs and straights, and just hopes that he overwhelms his opponent. And that's a pretty dangerous game if the person you're fighting is a competent enough striker. If you look back to the Mark Hunt fight with Verdum, Mark Hunt had his way in the first round and most of the second round because essentially Verdum was just leading with his chin out there and getting clipped with these nice counters. But Verdum is a pretty crafty fighter, and the way he got the finish in that fight is that he faked the takedown. He went for a really weak takedown, had Mark Hunt sprawl against it, so Mark Hunt was aware that Verdum wanted a takedown, faked the takedown again and jumped into a flying knee and got the KO. Really crafty stuff. So you're probably wondering, if Miocic was doing such a great job, why did he end up losing that fight with JDS? The reason why was because JDS, what he's really good at is body shots. His bread and butter is the body jab, which is a technique that I think is really, really underused in all combat sports across the line, but is a favorite of possibly one of the greatest boxers of all time, Floyd Mayweather, because it's a strike that not only does the body jab tire out your opponent, it sets up 2 really amazing strikes, and that is the body jab into the left hook or the body jab to a overhand right. And what JDS goes to routinely is the body jab to the overhand right. So the beauty of the body jab, especially from a heavyweight, is that it has all the potential to win entire opponents out, and especially since they're in heavyweight, this is going to gas opponents out really, really fast, considering how they gas out after the first round most of the time. So what JDS will do is that he'll go for the body jab, which is a level change. You level change and jab to the body or the solar plexus, and the cool thing is that when you do the body jab, the level change acts as head movement, making it harder for your opponent to counter, as well as your head's going to be to your right side. If you're JDS, you're fighting orthodox, so it puts you as far away from your opponent's right hand as possible, so you're pretty safe when it comes to returns. And as soon as JDS has his opponent feeling the body jab, and they're going to start feeling it, especially JDS because he's such a big guy, they're going to start reaching down to parry or block the body jab. And then what JDS will do is that he'll come up with an overhand right to their exposed head, because their guard's going to drop to try to block the overhand right. And this is exactly the setup that took out Cain Velasquez in their very, very first fight. Cain was coming forward, and I think JDS maybe threw 2 or 3 body jabs that whole fight, and then his 4th punch was just an overhand right that clocked Cain Velasquez cleanly across the head, and that's how he won the first fight. Even though a lot of people think it was a lucky just one-time shot, it was a really good setup. And because of this body jab, as well as right straight to the body that JDS was hitting throughout all of the Stipe Miocic fight, Stipe started tiring out halfway through the fight, and JDS is a veteran. He's been to the 5th round a lot, and he can hold his ground in the 5th round. He's a pretty good cardio for a heavyweight, and he started pulling ahead of the striking exchanges with Stipe, and that's what basically got him the decision. Also, because Stipe comes in as a very upright fighter, he has a really kickbox stance, whereas you see boxers usually come in and they're really slouched over, not slouched, but their heads are tucked in and they're leaning to one side and their legs are bent and turned in. Stipe Miocic comes standing straight up, and this makes him a tall opponent. What this actually leaves him really vulnerable against are really looping right-handed punches, because if you throw a really loop punch toward a really tall opponent or opponent that's upright, they're going to try to parry or put their hands in the way of the punch, and they're going to start reaching downwards. And if you want to see an example of this, just look at Joe Frazier versus Ali. What Joe Frazier would do against Muhammad Ali is that he would go bend at the waist as a dip, and as Ali was trying to punch downwards or reach down, he would come up and clock Ali with a left hook. So potential game plans for the two of them in the rematch. A lot of it is going to be for JDS to really switch up his game plan, because Stipe Miocic, he could come into this fight with the same game plan as before, and he has a good chance of taking it away from JDS. JDS has to change what he's been doing recently in a lot of fights to get out of this fight unscathed or without a war, or at least or win, because nobody wants to lose and nobody wants to be in a 5-round war where you're taking 100 shots to the head, causing brain damage really easily. Some things that Stipe could change is that in his last fight he was head hunting a lot, so every time he had Junior Dos Santos on the cage he would just be swinging at JDS's head, and the head is a very mobile target. You can dip it, weave, all these things, and it makes it a lot more harder to punch. Whereas if you start throwing body punches against the cage, the body cannot move, it's just stuck there on your body, it can't weave or dip or anything. So basically, if Stipe started mixing it up against the body, not only would he have a higher percent chance of hitting the body, it would also tire out JDS, because body shots suck and you get really tired from them. For JDS, for sure, the biggest thing is that he's got to stay off the cage, since Kane has beat him up against the cage. Mark Hunt didn't even want him against the cage, but he got him against the cage. And even Ben Rothwell got him against the cage, but he didn't really do much there. What JDS should be really working on is that he should be really working on those direction changes, shuffling to his left, then quickly changing right as soon as he sees that Stipe wants to throw a punch that will intercept him if he's circling left. Feinting and faking so he can get Stipe reacting and not committing to punches. And also something that we saw in the Alistair Overeem versus Stipe Miocic fight is punching clutching. So what Alistair Overeem would do when he got his back against the cage, he would go in for a punch against Stipe, grab onto him into the clinch, and then he actually span around. So Stipe's back was against the cage and Alistair was back in the middle of the ring. Just give him more room to get out of the way of Stipe's returns. So if JDS does get stuck against the cage, what he should adapt is what Conor McGregor did on the Nate Diaz 2 fight, which is bicep control on the punching arm that your opponent is using, and overhook on the other arm to stop that opponent from using that other arm to start hitting you. Because in the second and third Cain Velasquez fight, what JDS would do is that from having his stance squashed and back against the cage, you just start winging punches toward Cain Velasquez, which was doing nothing for him. It was just opening him up for attacks from Velasquez and getting him marked up. If he just went to a simple bicep control and overhook control, that way he can work on trying to circle out and regain position in the middle of the cage. As well as he circles out, what Conor McGregor did against Nate Diaz is that he would circle out to the arm that he had bicep control with and exit using an elbow. And the cool thing is that if somebody has you pressed up against the cage and they're really pushing into you, if you point out an elbow or use your elbow to hit them, their weight is going forward and they're bumping into a really hard piece of material. So imagine like if you were walking down the street and you walked headfirst into a pole, right? You don't have to be walking fast to let that pole hurt you. It's gonna hurt because it's such a hard piece of material. And even in the third Cain Velasquez fight, JDS, I feel like he did this by accident, but there was a moment where he had his elbow out and Cain Velasquez came crashing into it and temporarily wobbled him. And if JDS noticed that and he went back to that, he probably could have had Cain Velasquez not wanting to go to the cage as much because he was going to get scared of getting rocked by an elbow. But if JDS finds himself unable to grab the clinch or is on the cage and he's taking a beating, this is kind of like a last defense type of thing. But what you're supposed to be doing is you're supposed to be trying to change directions. You have to have your chin pressed up against your chest so your forehead is the target, and that's the best place next to not getting hit to take a punch. Have your arms up, also guarding you, and using your elbows to deflect punches, because if one, your elbow can take the punch, and two, if your opponent hits the point of your elbow full force with a punch, you have a good chance of really injuring their hand or even breaking it. So in conclusion, even if JDS won the last fight between the two, he's still showing his really bad habits of getting stuck on the cage and getting beat up there. Yeah, so if this video gets 10 likes, I'm thinking of doing another breakdown video of a different fight on the UFC 211 fight card, maybe like Eddie Alvarez versus Dustin Poirier or Damian Maia versus Jorge Masvidal, which I think will be a really great fight. So if you guys want to see me do a breakdown of one of those fights, make sure to hit that like button. Well guys, this was Patrick from Fight Prof. Thanks for watching. Like the video if you didn't already. Subscribe. Leave a comment down below what your thoughts are about this fight. Comment down any fights that you would want me to break down in the future. And yeah, hope you have a great day. See you guys.